Good evening to all. Let me start by welcoming all the officials from the Ministries of National Security, Trade and Industry, Agriculture and Land and Fisheries, and of course to all the viewing and listening audience to the 14th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. This is the committee's second public hearing into the inquiry on regional integration and the strengthening of the CARICOM institution. Let me take this opportunity to have the Ministry of Trade, we'll start with that particular ministry, introduce themselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Norris Herbert. I'm the Permanent Secretary. And together on our delegation is Trudy Lewis, Acting Senior Economist, Ms. Dana Isles, the State Council 3, and Mr. Kriya Balaram Singh, Economist 2. Thank you.
Thank you. As I indicate, we will begin with the Ministry of Trade. But for all present, let me state or remind you of the 8 objectives of this inquiry. 1, to investigate CARICOM's efforts to encourage regional integration. 2, to assess whether regional integration can feasibly occur with a particular focus on any successes thus far and any challenges. 3, to assess Trinidad and Tobago's stance on regional integration. 4, to understand the current policies that facilitate regional integration. Sorry. 5, to examine the efficiency and capacity of CARICOM. To determine CARICOM's plans and strategies for strengthening its organs and the institution as a whole. To determine the challenges, successes, and opportunities of CARICOM. And 8, to determine the extent to which CARICOM has implemented any recommendations and the successes of such recommendations, if any. I would like an opening statement from the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Norris Herbert. And as we go along, I will get opening statements from the PS for Agriculture and for National Security. So, Mr. Norris Herbert, please.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair. Chair, on the issue of integration is critical for Trinidad and Tobago, and where we stand as the Ministry of Trade and Industry, we are focused on the trade component in the wider scheme of activities related to integration. In the literature, there are different types of integration. There is the customs union, free trade areas agreement, there is the common market, there is the union, and there's also the political component. So there are different types of integration. In this hemisphere, we have had different aspects over the past few decades. And I only wish to draw your attention to something like the free trade area of the Americas, which was attempted at one time and which eventually was stopped in its track. And in the case of CARICOM, we have been aspiring to a single market and economy, and that is since the mid-70s or early 70s. Or we had a customs union, and eventually in the 80s, we took the decision that we would move onto the single market and economy. And that itself has provided some challenges, and the single economy is now deferred, but we are in the process of moving from the trade and goods area in the customs union type level towards the single market and economy. So it is in that context we find ourselves participating in the key organ of the regional movement which deals with trade, and that's the Council for Trade and Economic Development. And inside there are a number of sub-institutions which we partake in. So essentially that is how I will start the discussion from our side. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me remind all officials as well as committee members that all questions must be directed through the chair. I also to remind you that please kindly activate your microphones when you are speaking, and if you have cell phones on, please turn them off. And just a little oversight on my part with respect to introduction. I will start on my right before we get into the actual question.
Hi, I'm Anita Haynes, and I'm joining this committee from the Senate, the opposition bench.
Good afternoon all. Avinash Singh, member.
Good afternoon all. Shamfa Kudjal, member.
Good afternoon. Rodney Charles, member.
Mali McDonald, chairman. So we begin our investigation with trade. And we have heard the opening statement by the permanent secretary. Any member of my team?
So I've looked through the documents, and given your opening statement, we're looking at how Trinidad and Tobago has adjusted its policies to move towards regional integration. So we just wanted to get a sense of the adjustments that have been made to move us towards regional integration.
Chair, in response, Trinidad and Tobago has been a key actor in the regional movement for integration. And one of the strengths that I've constantly heard since I was not there from the beginning, but is that Trinidad has, over the years, developed a consistent trade policy and has remained consistent to the characteristics of external trade. So in terms of promoting the trading relationship, Trinidad and Tobago has consistently applied that outlook, as opposed to, say, the more protectionist approach which was there in the early days. So Trinidad and Tobago moved its trade paradigm along to facilitating and encouraging external trade within its borders. So you find that Trinidad and Tobago in the earlies was one of the first countries to adjust its common external tariff and has consistently applied in the main adjustments to tariffs and policies as agreed at the regional level over the years. So by and large, when there was the discussion about moving towards the single market and economy, Trinidad and Tobago had undertaken most of the major initiatives that were required at that time.
So the adjustments, so we've made adjustments, but the challenges are all external to our trade policies. Is that what we're getting at? Because the impact of the adjustments would be almost negated by external challenges. Is that safe to say?
The success of the changes are really communal or common. All right? So for instance, if there's an agreement on movement of goods or services, you really require all countries to accept it firstly, and then to adopt it.
Yes.
And by and large, in terms of a regional integration, one wants a certain level of certainty. So one would like the measures to be represented in law as opposed to administrative arrangements. And I think that is where the challenge has been. So there are those countries who on the onset indicate their disadvantage, and then there are those that go ahead and implement by administrative arrangements, and the move towards the legislative dimension sometimes is delayed. So that is where the challenge comes in.
Okay. Could I ask a question, interject at this point? We have been talking about time immemorial about regional integration. What would you consider, Mr. Herbert, to be the main hindrance or hindrances towards regional integration, as you see it from your ministry?
Well, at the bottom of the hindrance is the contradiction which takes place between nationalism and regionalism. So, nationally, governments have a certain level of interest, and at times it may coincide, and at times it may not coincide with the regional interest. So even though our heads, for instance, may agree that we would go to a certain point, it takes lots of time to get there if there is not the buy-in at the different levels. And it ranges from goods, where it's just a question of tariffs and customs and standards bodies and that sort of thing, to services where you have both the movement of services and factors of production, and you also have like even movement of people. And then you move on to the economy, where you have the issue of the currency, for instance, and economic policy. So you have some countries in the region with a common currency, say the OECS, and then you have some countries with a flexible currency and some with a floating currency, and you have all those issues to align, and really and truly at the end of it is the imperative of national interest versus the imperative of regional interest.
So are you saying, Mr. Herbert, if I have to interpret all that you are telling me, is it correct to state that each Caribbean state, so to speak, you know, they would view themselves, or they try to protect their sovereignty as far as possible, and therefore, in the lineup of things, they put the country first as opposed to going regional?
My personal view is that has emerged greater and greater over the years. And you must remember that CARICOM is an association of sovereign states,
Yes.
as opposed to the European Union, so where there is a commission which can take action against individual states. In our case, each member state retains its national sovereignty in the arrangements.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Charles.
Through you, Madam Chair. One of the issues, recurring issues, the question that Trinidad has a significant trade advantage with these small islands, and they perceive us to be the main beneficiary of the CARICOM enterprise. Have we ever done a study to find out what does CARICOM cost Trinidad and Tobago in its totality? And I'm talking about benefits. In agriculture, there's a significant trade imbalance with the small islands, that's one. Secondly, we support UE significantly. We support the what? The Caribbean Development Bank. And if we total all these supports that we give, we may very well realize, or we'll be in a position to say, listen, there's mutual benefits. There are benefits to us in trade, manufacturing goods, and there are benefits to you in terms of the financial support we give. But to make that point, we have to have before us the figure, the total cost of the supports, direct and indirect cost to CARICOM.
We have made the argument on many occasions, but we have not done the quantification that you are asking about. But we do recognize that in the area of goods, we are a major beneficiary. In the area of services, the statistics is a bit more difficult for persons who operate in that field know that internationally services statistics are very difficult to come by. But the anecdotal and a priori feeling is that even in that area, Trinidad and Tobago is a major beneficiary in the arrangement. In the institutional arrangements, we generally contribute in the area of 23% of budgets, or somewhere around there. It would vary as member states apart or not apart, but it's in the vicinity of 22–23%. But we have not done the quantification that you are asking. Now, I don't even know if doing the quantification will be very useful, because it's a lot of other issues are inside here, but maybe it's useful to have the quantification on hand at any point in time.
So, Madam Chair, through you, when we go back to the main hindrance being the buy-in at all levels, and I've gone through what the Ministry of Trade has done, which is participate in regional organs and bodies, etc., right? So I guess my first question is, if our participation, in your view, is at capacity, so have we done all that we can do, and now are we waiting for additional buy-in to move towards further regional integration, or is there more that we can do to facilitate?
Well, I would say it's not a static situation where you can say that you do all that you could do and think that that will hold in the future. Right. I think that in the past, we have been at the forefront, all right? And in addition to being at the forefront, we have actually encouraged and pulled along much of the membership of the integration. So, for instance, when the region is to engage in external trade relations, we generally support organizing at the regional level first to engage with the wider international community. And we have been active in that. For instance, when we negotiated with Dominican Republic, we were at the forefront of that. It was first a Dominican Republic Trinidad agreement, and then we moved it to CARICOM Dominican Republic agreement. Costa Rica was the same. Cuba, we were at the forefront. So we, in the past, have done, I think, all that we could have done at that point in time. Increasingly, in today's arrangement, you have other subgroupings being developed within the region. So you have the OECS forming their economic union, or working towards that. And that in itself creates different kinds of dynamics. You also have Belize, which is part of Central America, right? So, and you have Suriname on the continent of South America, and there are different implications here. But what I'm saying is that I do believe that Trinidad and Tobago has done what it could do, but that cannot hold. You cannot say that we have done what we could do and expect that that will last in perpetuity. We generally have to continue to do more.
Sorry. Mr. Herbert,
Yes, Madam Chair.
would you say that Trinidad and Tobago has benefited from regional integration so far?
The short answer is yes. And one only have to look at the economic aspects. So much of our trade exports, our manufacturers are trading heavily in the CARICOM region. Jamaica is probably one of our biggest markets.
Yeah.
Then the OECS, not only are we exporting significant amounts there, but we have also set up operations in the OECS in Jamaica. If you go to the shelves, you will see our manufacturing products. But the importance of that is not just that we are exporting, but that that sector is what employs lots of our population. So it is very critical that we get the benefits from there, because that is a major aspect of our economy, in addition to the foreign exchange and of that, which is so critical at this point in time. In addition, lots of the service providers, and they move up and down the region providing services. And as I said before, the anecdote, the statistical information is very difficult in that area, but anecdotal, we have seen significant opportunities taken by our service providers. There was an occasion when our heads were speaking about integrated arrangements, like, for instance, Guyana's land, and maybe Trinidad can provide some investment and get output from the land, or Surin Jamaica's bauxite, or Suriname has other, so there was a time when that was a major item of discussion, but I think that sort of outlook has kind of taken a backseat in these days. But I guess as the economy, part of the single market and economy takes root, I think it will come back on the agenda.
Okay, so Mr. Herbert, having agreed that Trinidad and Tobago has benefited a lot from regional integration, could you tell us what could be done to move us to the next level, to strengthen our hands with CARICOM? Because there seems to be a stalemate, that we are just voicing this. And this is what I've been trying to do, because this is our second hearing. I'm trying to get from public officials, what could we do to push this regional integration and the strengthening of CARICOM? What could we do? We are benefiting. So if we should go deeper, we should see better benefits and more benefits. You talk about the job creation, etc. What could we do to move to that next level? And what is the hindrance? What are the hindrances? I think that's what we want to find out.
If you were to take the members of CARICOM, there will be a distribution of benefits. So Trinidad and Tobago may get 50%, and Barbados a certain percent, and Jamaica, and OECS, and others. In addition to that, the world economy is changing, and many persons who didn't used to trade with the Caribbean are now trading with the CARICOM countries. And the tariffs, for instance, are going down. So the competitive edge that a CARICOM country would have had X years ago has diminished significantly. So any arrangement to advance the regional arrangement must involve not just efforts on the MDCs of CARICOM, which is Trinidad, Guyana, but also it must have a certain kind of understanding with the smaller territories, many of whom has felt that they have been disadvantaged over the years.
Well, Mr. Herbert, that's a very serious statement you have just made there.
Well,
because one would have thought that as a region, you know, there is strength in numbers. There'll be what you call economies of scale. You will know better as economists. Trudy will know. Miss Lois, sorry, will know better. Economies of scale, you know, you come together as a body and you're able to negotiate. But if it is that we are losing that competitive edge, and other countries of Europe, maybe Far East and whatnot, they are coming in and actually trading with our, you know, within our region, then something is wrong. Then we need to examine what is happening and why aren't we hearing more about regional integration? You know, because this is a threat. It reminded me over the years when we were in opposition, when I was in opposition, the constant reminder that shale gas would have been a threat to us at some point in time. And actually, it has. It has turned out to be so. Now here we have a situation where we are poised on losing or starting to lose that competitive edge as a group of countries. But we are not hearing anything. And, you know, so that statement you made there, unless I'm misinterpreting you, the statement I'm hearing here is critical.
Chair, this is 2018. I know you are aware that it's 2018, but the elements that created competition or determined level of competitiveness years ago is quickly evaporating. So the issue of competition on your doorstep from even outside of the region, China, elsewhere, is a reality. Regardless, that's a base position, regardless of what you do. The issue now is how, as an internal grouping, we organize ourselves to treat with such competition. And we got an hiatus from the fact that we did not complete the FTA. Had we completed the FTA, the competitive forces would have been much greater. All right, so that is a given. So the real question is, how, as 14 or so countries, do we organize ourselves to treat like it's provided for in the Treaty of Chaguaramas, Article 80, which provides for the external trade arrangements? How do we organize ourselves individually and collectively to treat with those forces? And as a group of sovereign states, everybody has a say in that. So it's really about balancing the interest therein to get a collective increase in the competitiveness of our countries.
Forgive me a little bit, but I like figures. What percentage of our trade is with CARICOM countries, and what percentage of our trade is with outside the region? Because I'm wondering if it is under 10%, as I think it is, I'm not sure, then we may be spending time and a lot of effort on 10% of the trade, which probably optimally will increase to 15%. And I am wondering, and since we are energy-based countries, I know we are diversifying, but I understand that Guyana will, within the next 2 years, will be producing close to 300,000 barrels of oil per day. Are we putting sufficient effort, in your view, in terms of this new opportunity for us to leverage our experience in the energy sector and at the same time deal with the CARICOM enterprise in a way that will be beneficial both to Guyana and to Trinidad and Tobago?
Chair, I'll ask Ms. Lewis to address the specific figures, but before I do, I would just like to say that the elements of exchange is one thing. The elements of economic contribution in terms of employment is another thing that one has to factor. All right? And so I do think that it will be important to consider both aspects and not really with the mindset that one is important and the other, but to seek to improve in each area. In addition, in terms of the energy aspect, again, in my view, I don't have the statistics to back it up, but there is significant scope for service providers in Guyana and Suriname as they develop their own resources in that economy. So it's just to make the point that, fine, we need to provide and look at the figures and that sort of thing, but we also need to have the policy outlook that the activities are important for different things.
Just one clarification, and I agree with you. It is not an either or, CARICOM or, right? But moving pari passu on both fronts. Okay? Basically, that's it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are a number of questions that sit on my mind, but I would ask you just a couple. In interviewing you today, I get the message that I'm getting is, it's not we, it's them, right? So we're doing all that we can as Trinidad and Tobago, and of course for regional integration to happen, one hand can't clap, so the others have to be on board also. You've also mentioned that the statements towards saying that the economic environment has changed, free trade now dominates the world, so the rest of our brothers and sisters in the region are pretty much free to interact and trade with other countries. That being said, do you think that this whole concept of regional integration is still attractive to the rest of the region and still relevant considering the economic background that we now are a part of?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the member, with respect to our export figures, CARICOM's exports as a percentage of total exports was 10.1% for 2016. And with respect to imports, we import approximately 1.4% of our total imports from CARICOM. And back to the PS.
Chair, I think the question was in two parts, we as opposed to them, and the other part was the attractiveness of international trade liberalization, I think. Regional integration, sorry.
Against the background of trade liberalization.
Against trade liberalization. So, Chair, it will never be we and not we, but them. It will always be all of us having to make decisions, having to employ imperatives to make our competitiveness characteristics much better. The countries of the OECS, for instance, they have their own concerns, and they will be always striving to have a more comfortable and better share of the cake, we also will want to have a better share of the cake. But together, we have to try to increase the cake if we have to get greater benefits on both sides. And that's just putting it in a soft statement. In terms of the attractiveness of regional integration, I think there are, as you do, Chair, there are many dimensions of regional integration. And because of that, and we are talking about trade here, but there are others, there are foreign affairs and all those other aspects, social and everything. But in terms of trade, the integration promotes not only government-to-government arrangements, it really provides the backbone and the framework for private sector to operate. And to the extent that we can, as governments, encourage that type of expansion and mobility integration will be very important, because as governments, there was a time when governments dominated the state sector. So you had things like flour mills and other state enterprises and things, and government hand was very big. And over the years, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in other parts, the government's role has diminished somewhat, and private sector has taken a greater hand. So what I'm saying is that trade liberalization, yes, trade agreements, but at the end of the day, what you are seeking to do is to have firms export more. To export more, other countries would want to be able to export to you too. The days of the CBI and CARICOM being D agreements, they are quickly facing, although they are in the last set of dimensions. But the issue is really regional integration, to make use of extended production possibilities. So like, for instance, you would have a firm that has developed in Trinidad, operating in Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, operating in St. Lucia or Jamaica, and those dynamics help to build the scale. All right, so that is very important. And even though there's liberalization, because liberalization is a given, countries out in the cold 20 years ago are trading now. China, for example. They, because of their scale, because of their production element, they might be able to compete on your doorstep as you can. You know, so all these are facts in the trade environment, and we have to package that as we seek to achieve improvements.
With that said, my next question would be, in 2001, I remember being a sixth form student and being excited about the CSME and all that the CSME has promised. And here we are 16, 17 years later, and it feels like we haven't really moved as it relates to the movement of factors of production, good. But the movement of people, the harmonization of domestic regulations and so on, it still feels like we are stuck. What can we really pinpoint as our accomplishments since the establishment of the CSME in 2001? And do we still believe that the Treaty of Chagaramas of 1973 still has the necessary bite to match the back that we have been promoting as it relates to CARICOM and regional integration? I have my personal view that it is weak, because we've said in the documents that you should not do this, you should not do that, and then on another stage or in the same breath, we get away with doing the same things that we said we wouldn't do. So are we considering going back to the table and putting stronger provisions in the document so that we can abide to a stronger document? And my third and final question would be, we tend to harp on the economic and trade benefits of regional integration, and then we start beating up on ourselves as to how far we didn't get. But if we examine the journey of, let's say, the European Union, it took them over 100 years, and they would have done stuff like exchange of students and cultural exchanges to foster that relationship between the different communities. What are we doing outside of saying we're not making money here, this is not happening economically? What are the other strategies that we can talk about and celebrate to give young people that hope that we have promised as it relates to regional integration? So 3 questions. Thanks.
To answer the question of what has been done since 2001, I would generally say that the area of services, the initial aspects of services, has brought about some improvement. So the areas of the categories of skills that was moving at 2001 when just at the time when Protocol 2 was being developed to be integrated into the treaty, I would think that there are some areas of progress, albeit that it's not at the level that we anticipated by now. And you see, these, in addition to the economic initiatives you take, also have other considerations. And as I spoke about, national interests always have to be weighed. And countries, being sovereign states, have to face the social implications associated with such movements. So there has been significant progress with the categories since 2001. You have from university graduates down to, I think, is teachers, you know, we have musicians, sportsmen, all these different categories. But there have been some improvements here. Now, since that time, the goalposts for the single economy has expanded. Right? One would have thought that by now we'd have made significant progress with some of the areas that we're talking about, like currency, like economic harmonization of economic models, and those have been pushed forward. And in a sense, that is a consequences of sovereign countries feeling that, well, we need some more time to adjust and to reach where we want to go, because these countries now have to explain to their populations what they are doing and to get their buy-in. And my own view is that that has been part of the delay that has resulted over the years. So the single market is no longer at this time, but 2020 or so. And we don't know whether that will materialize, because at the end of the day, what is required is the implementation will of all the sovereign states. And to the extent that we can move that, and remember, it's not just trade, but it's also external relations, social, cultural, all the dimensions. To the extent that as a people, and there are other things like transportation and the infrastructural bits that are missing in the equation. You know, so there are a number of issues that we have to treat with.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would ask all my questions, just 4 very brief questions in one. I saw from your responses here, we've negotiated a couple agreements with the Dominican Republic and Costa Rica and Cuba. First question, I saw Cuba as a destination now. With respect to, apart from the tourism side of it, sitting from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, I recently saw the government taking the initiative to open the transportation part of that and offer a fair direct flight. From from where you sit, what benefit that would bring directly and indirectly to Trinidad and Tobago? That's the first question. The second one, when you speak to persons in the business community and you speak to wholesalers, manufacturers, retailers, they all speak about these fairs, these free trade markets, and in some instances, permanent markets. You go to Canton Fair in China, the Panama market, and trade shows in Brazil, and so on. Have you all at the Ministry of Trade, explore that market opportunity in terms of having something permanent based in Trinidad and Tobago because of where we are located, being one of the best transshipment ports, for the world, as a matter of fact? And if so, what implications that would bring to the people of Trinidad and Tobago? So the second question is free trade market, and I'm thinking something like a permanent established market in Trinidad and Tobago that would benefit all the players. The third question centers around all, this whole CARICOM free trade and integration. Everything, comes down from manufacturing or producing some good or services to be sold on the international market. And I'm going to zoom in here. It may be controversial, but I'm going to zoom in here where retailers, wholesalers, manufacturers, and traders, in terms of the foreign exchange, because you hear them complaining on time and time again about the availability. So in my mind, my opinion is that the private sector is not fully self-sustainable in generating their own foreign currency to continue. And the government has had ongoing attempts to put an injection into the market to stimulate activity. My question in that part is, from where you sit, the volume of foreign exchange inputted by both the private and the public sector, what type of economic activity or what are the outputs? Because if I put in $10 million into the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to know that it has generated an output of X amount. I'm not seeing that. Where is the US going in terms of manufacturers, retailers, traders, and so on? And my last question, final question, would be, I see that a particular company was successful in going to the CCJ and having the CCJ ruled on a matter where trade is concerned. I'm just curious as to know, are there any other matters that are before CCJ at this point in time? And, if so, if you could shed some light on those matters. Thank you.
All right. I'm not sure that I have all the questions, but I think the first question dealt with the trade agreements. And Cuba in particular, where just recently there was the reintroduction of the flight from Port of Spain to Havana. And you said apart from tourism, well, tourism is part of the arrangement also. And people move to do business. And based on the interactions we have had, say over the last 16 months or 18 months, so we have seen significant arrangements advanced between the private sector in Trinidad and, well, Cuba is a state-dominated in terms of its relationships. So we have seen significant improvements. I will not call any company name, but both from exports, investment opportunities, in terms of other business relationships, we have seen increased prospects there. There's one area that we are working to improve is the intermediary banking relationships, and that's because Cuba generally has a long payment period. So we have an interim arrangement there, and we are trying to get the best arrangement in place there. So we feel that in terms of Cuba, there's good prospects for the business community, especially in a period when we're talking about exports, foreign exchange, etc. I'm not sure I understood.
The second part was establishing a free trade market area as comparable to the Panama market or the Canton Fair in China or the trade show in Brazil. If you all explore that option, coming from the Ministry of Trade for your clients, being the manufacturers, the suppliers, and so on.
We have spoken about the transshipment possibility, and that is something that we are exploring. All right? We have not spoken about the free. Well, we have a zone for production that we are also treating with. How that would emerge, it's still to be finalized. All right? The third thing is about the foreign exchange. And here I give my own view, because the issue of foreign exchange is a very tricky and controversial one. And government cannot be expected to provide the foreign exchange input that they have done over previous years. And we all know the reason for that, so I would not go into that. But the point is that the relationships of businesses has to be one where there is some hope of inputting foreign exchange into Trinidad and Tobago or generating foreign exchange. So the issue of alliances in terms of joint ventures with manufacturers or external actors becomes critical. I will not get into the issue of exchange rates. That's not for me at this point.
Chair, with you, I was relating to, as my colleague, Member Charles, was zooming into numbers in terms of, and the example I use, if I input $10 million into the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, are we seeing direct impact in terms of the economic activity generated in terms of, figures? Or is it that these persons who purchase the foreign exchange to do trade and all of that is going somewhere else?
Mike?
I'm asking from my own personal opinion in terms of, from where you sit at the Ministry of Trade, your clients, being manufacturers, those in TT who go to TTMA, retailers, wholesalers, all these persons who come to you for import permit and all of that, who need to get foreign exchange to do their business, to whether it be using it to buy raw materials, to convert it into a saleable item, to ship back out. In terms of the generation of activity coming from that, as I said in my question, the private sector doesn't seem to be generating enough foreign exchange and hence the government's input. So in terms of where you all sit when you all generate your numbers, your graphs and figures, is there any relationship as to where you can point to this U.S. Foreign exchange value going to as opposed to the actual economic activity in the country?
Chair, I think we need to be practical on this issue. At the last budget reading, the Minister of Finance spoke about measures for the private sector, to Exim Bank. All right? Before that, we did not have specific measures for manufacturers. And I don't think any one of us in this room can say how much money went to A, the private sector, or B, the manufacturing sector. So And I don't think the Exim Bank arrangement is finalized as yet. So the point is that I don't think we have the rudiments to say X million went to manufacturers. So it went to these 10 manufacturers, and these 10 manufacturers performed in this way. When the central bank injects money into the commercial banks, they distribute it according to their own demands. And so the point is that it is very difficult that arrangement to determine whether the injection into manufacturing and the output that arose from that outcome. And I think the fourth question had to do with the CCJ. As far as I know, there were a couple TCL matters before the CCJ, and I don't know of any more. Well, there was the issue of the Belizean national who had taken action because of the whole issue with gender and acceptance of movement. And I don't know that that has been resolved. It has been, no, I don't think that it has been resolved, but I don't know of any others. I know there have been threats along the way, but I don't know of any other at this point in time.
Mr. Herbert, I know the final question to your ministry. I know that the government of Trinidad and Tobago makes financial payments, contributions to support certain regional institutions. For example, the CDF, the Caribbean Development Fund, the CARICOM Competition Commission, and of course the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. What are the payments up to date? What is the status of these payments? And how would our economic situation currently affect any moves in terms of regional integration at this point in time? But are we current on the payments today?
Chair, CDF, that needs to be directly to the Ministry of Finance.
Okay.
Competition, we paid up to last year, didn't it? Yeah. Up to last year, and this year is still pending. Mm-hmm. And cross-queue, I think we paid up to last year. So that's our contribution. Traditionally, we have been one of the first to pay in CARICOM.
Okay, good to hear. All right. Thank you very much, Ministry of Trade. Sorry. We turn our attention now to Ministry of National Security. Opening statement from Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, Ms. Lydia Jacobs.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Is Ms. Lydia Jacobs, you are not?
No, she is not. She's not here this
afternoon. You are the acting Permanent Secretary. My apologies, Mrs. Vashti Shrikin Singh Jitman.
Correct.
I got that?
Well, almost.
All right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Madam Chairman, and members of the committee. The Ministry of National Security appreciates the opportunity to contribute to the Joint Select Committee on Foreign Affairs, with particular reference to regional integration and the strengthening of the CARICOM institution. For Ministry, regional integration is guided by the decisions of the Conference of Heads of Government, other organs of CARICOM, as well as the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. As such, given the focus as well as the objectives of the inquiry, the Ministry of National Security responded to the questions from the position which considered the role and mandate of this ministry and its perspective on regional integration. In this regard, we are pleased to be here and to clarify any matters you may have in this public forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Madam Acting Permanent Secretary. I would I won't take a chance with the name. It's Srikin Singh Jitman. Yes. Thank you. Given the regions are security challenges, which are common, more or less, porous borders, prevalence of gangs, drugs, high murder rates throughout the Caribbean, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Bahamas, Trinidad. How are we working collectively to confront these issues? And in your view, is there more that needs to be done, or you are satisfied with our collective response to these issues?
Madam Chair, through you, it was remiss of me. I am here with 3 other colleagues from the ministry, and I would ask them to introduce themselves now.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair. I am Shameen Gandhi Andrews, the Acting Chief Immigration Officer.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I am Major Richard Lynch, Deputy Director of International Affairs Unit.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Zeke Bihari, International Affairs Coordinator.
Member, Madam Chair, member, I will now ask Mr. Richard Lynch to respond to this question.
Madam Chair, through you, if I understand the question clearly, Member Charles, the question of the regional security architecture being a fundamental framework within which we address common issues have been essentially the approach that CARICOM member states have taken, particularly in the context of the establishment of 4 crucial agencies, one being CARICOM Impacts and its sub-agencies, which is essentially an implementation type of agency, CARICOM Impacts. Of course, there's also the Regional Security System and the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, as well as the Caribbean Aviation Safety and Security Oversight System. The reality is that a lot of the challenges that you would have mentioned in your question are transnational in nature. A lot of the drivers of insecurity, and as such, the idea or the concept that we approach these challenges from a common security framework is a fundamental rationale for the establishment of these agencies. Secondly, the fact that we are at different levels experiencing some measures of resource constraints in comparison to the multidimensional nature of our threats. The rationale, of course, would be if we have certain types of resource constraints with common multidimensional threats, then the approach would be we need to mobilize our resources and get what we would call bang for buck.
Thank you very much. But given that a lot of our problems arise from the fact that we are located between the producers and the consumers of drugs, and we just happen to be on the way, and we speak respectively of the United States as main consumer, given that we have had in the region, collectively, significant numbers of deportees. In fact, they have solved their crime problem by deporting. Given the fact that at the Arms Trade Treaty, the question of guns, which is a significant problem, and the United States, for example, has not, because of pressure from the NRA, has been reticent in assisting us in developing these tracking mechanisms that could help us identify where these guns come from. And the question I'm asking, how have we collectively, given those realities, sought to talk to the United States to let her know that the problem that we face here has its origins significantly in that country, and therefore they can do more. So when I hear you talk about the resource constraints, and I understand impacts is suffering because some countries can't make their contributions or what, are we sufficiently addressing that country in terms of its responsibility to not just call us asshole countries, but to help us to develop in a way that could maximize our significant resources that we have and deal with the issue of crime.
Madam Chair, through you, the idea of a common architecture for security within CARICOM is not isolated to member states collaborating and cooperating on matters of common threats to our security. It also, the security aspect makes its way up to the Conference of Heads of Government, and as such, the opportunity to integrate a regional position as CARICOM reaches out to our other international partners is a fundamental framework of our security architecture. So that while it would not be the remit of, well, certainly not myself, to necessarily give the details as far as how the CARICOM framework would engage other regions as far as the global network around issues like you would have raised in terms of drug trafficking and so on. We would anticipate that perhaps at the heads of government level, there is a measure of mobilization of position that is then articulated to one of our international partners that I think you're alluding to.
Okay. My understanding is that we, within CARICOM, we are the shadow government responsible for security, national security. Am I correct?
Lead government in the quasi-cabinet for security.
Lead government in the quasi-cabinet. And one of the instruments through which CARICOM addresses the issue of national security is the question of the Security Council within CARICOM. And my understanding from the documentation that we got from you is that this mechanism is not functioning as it ought to. Could you care to give us some reason why this is so, if it is in fact?
My apologies, I'm not sure I understand the particular question. Could you kindly repeat, may I ask?
All right. My understanding is that there is an institution called the Security Council within CARICOM. The question I'm asking is that, is there a role, a greater role for us? Is it functioning optimally? And is there a role for us in this mechanism?
Well, if you're referring to the Council for Ministers with responsibility for national security and law enforcement, which would be CONSLE, there is a system by which CONSLE reports to the lead government with responsibility for crime and security, which would be Trinidad and Tobago. So yes, there is a mechanism for reporting on these matters.
Mr. Lynch, my question to you is, how would deepening our ties with CARICOM and pushing the regional integration, how would it help us here in Trinidad with respect to crime?
Madam Chair, the transnational nature of our security would seem to suggest that some measure of regional security is a fundamental aspect of how we achieve national security in Trinidad and Tobago. One may argue that the inverse is also a reality. To the extent that Trinidad and Tobago achieves a certain measure of national security, it redounds to the benefit of the region as well. So in this context, the regional integration allows for the mobilization of resources among different sovereign states to treat with common challenges to our security. So strictly from the question of the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago and by extension our national security, the regional integration effort allows us to treat with some challenges that are generated outside of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, this will then beg the second question. How successful have we been at regional integration these matters, matter of crime, which seem to be occupying a lot of our attention these days?
Well, I suppose, Madam Chair, the question of how successful may be dependent on what are the measures that we use to determine some level of success.
The truth is that the fact that, and I'm glad that trade went before us, they would have laid a particular foundation as far as the interconnectedness of our global system. And within that context, the question of new and emerging threats are now synergized with some measure of traditional threats. And so this multidimensional framework within which we are experiencing threats to our national security means that we are always in the pursuit of new and innovative ways to allow the regional integration system to at least match some of the threats to us as a region, as well as sovereign states. So there is a measure of success if you consider that to some extent we are, if you can excuse my military language, we are shooting at a moving target. It's not a static environment that we are functioning in, and as such, constant review of our different agencies within the framework within which they operate is a fundamental aspect of how we assess the level of success of our initiatives.
Yeah. So from your response, and I guess I'm asking your opinion here, strengthening regional integration will have a positive impact on our national security. So from that, and looking at what we've already done, what, in your view, is the road ahead? Where should we be going now?
Well, Madam Chair, through you, again, I want to underscore our happiness to some extent that trade went before us. It's important for us to locate this regional integration process in a broader perspective, and I'm glad that my colleague made reference to the European Union and their own challenges. Relatively, one may consider the fact that, well, if we look at it relatively, we are on the way. But certainly, if you are asking for prescriptions in terms of security, there are a number of initiatives that are in train. Some of them, I would imagine, are providing different levels of effectiveness. But again, because we are treating with issues that are not static, prescriptions would certainly be continued dialogue among sovereign states to identify what are those common areas that we can mobilize resources around. And again, because trade spoke to the variation of economic realities across different sovereign states within this multilateral framework, the same applies for security. Depending on one's economic and other circumstances, we may look at security through different lenses. And as such, the process by which we arrive at least what are those baseline common areas that we would want to work on definitely must be an output of continued dialogue.
Okay.
Chair, through you, to members of national security. In terms of the whole trust of movement of people as it relates to national security and this committee's role and function in foreign affairs is concerned, I just want to have a clarification on something I read recently. Of course, we will all agree where the parties are concerned in terms of strengthening a CARICOM institution. Of course, if persons from Trinidad is deported or somebody from the Caribbean is deported, vice versa, it may, it may affect the strength of CARICOM in terms of how we look at it. But I'm zooming in on national security. I just want to have an understanding of when persons of CARICOM, the group in CARICOM, is held at, let's say, our immigration center. I want to understand what are the costs associated with that activity in terms of, because I read, you have to wait for the resident country to pay some fee or something like that for that person to go back to their home territory. I just want to have an understanding in terms of the whole foreign affairs trust here. We are, trust with here. And if you can give me an example of instance where persons from CARICOM is held in Trinidad and Tobago, held at Immigration Center, and the process by which that person goes back to their home territory, the cost associated, and if we bear it or who bear it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Chair. Persons end up at the detention center if they're in breach of the immigration laws. And that goes for anybody. What happens when we encounter anybody in breach of the Immigration Act and its regulations is that they would go through a process of interview to determine their immigration status, whether they're in the country legally, illegally. They are then either detained at the detention center, depending on the risk involved, or they may be put on what we call an order of supervision, which means that they remain with some person who has vouched for them and is willing to support them until we go through a process of a special inquiry as outlined in the law. At the detention center, what happens is that they still go through the same special inquiry process. And we try to ascertain, one, their identity, which has to be done, first of all, whether they are in fact a national of any country. And when they appear before the special inquiry officer, it depends on whether they are given voluntary departure or they are ordered deported. Now, if they are ordered deported, what tends to happen, they either purchase their own ticket, or if they cannot afford to purchase their own ticket, then the state, that is the state that is deporting them, in this case Trinidad and Tobago, will have to bear the cost of the repatriation to their home country. In some instances, for example, if the person has been convicted for some criminal offense, that person has to be escorted. And in escorting them, it depends on where they're escorted to. They may require 1, 2, or 3 escorts. 3 escorts if it's a flight that, a journey that takes more than 8 hours. 2 escorts, depending on the risk. For example, they might be considered some risk on board the aircraft, and therefore they need to be detained somehow, and they need 2 escorts, or they may just need 1 escort, depending on the nature. Their length of detention is determined by whether or not we can identify them and how soon we are able to acquire a return ticket for them, either them and, of course, if they need escorts. And there are varying factors. They may opt to get their own ticket, and then their family would purchase that ticket. We make arrangements for them to leave. If the state has to pay for it, then we have to get approval from the permanent secretary to purchase tickets for that individual to return. So it just depends on different factors. A lot of the times, if we cannot identify them or we do not have travel documents for them, we have to await a travel document from their home country. If they, of course, if there's a mission here, we can get it easily. If not, then we have to get it from their home country.
Mrs. Gandhi Andrews, sometime last week, I read, I know you'll be next, I read in the newspapers, trying to remember this story, where currently in our prison, we have persons to be deported. And there was this argument, I recall, who will pay the airfare, whether it is the country where these people would be going or whether it is Trinidad. What is the situation like that? You are deporting people.
Yes.
Should we pay the cost or should the receiving country pay the cost?
If a state is deporting an individual, then the state bears the cost. As far as possible, we try to get persons to purchase their own tickets. If they are unable to purchase their own tickets, then the state will have to bear the cost of their repatriation, because the state is the one deporting them to their home country for some infraction of the law.
As a follow-up to that point raised, do you all have an idea as to what are the numbers like in terms of persons waiting or, waiting to be deported by the state, or in a case where CARICOM nationals, I don't know if you all have them in groupings or how you all, treat with it, but you all could give us an idea as to what the numbers are like in terms of, so I just want to have ideas to the cost to the state in that relation.
The number of persons at the detention center fluctuates, and it rolls over a lot of the times. There are persons who, as at today, we perhaps have just over 90 persons in detention, and that includes males and females. That figure may go up depending on if any exercises are conducted and foreign nationals are held and found to be in breach of the laws. If persons leave, then of course the numbers go down. So it really is not a set number of persons that would remain in detention. The detention center has optimally a capacity of 150 persons. That number could be increased to a maximum of 200. There are times when we have had well over 200 persons who we can detain at the detention center, and that's when we would do an assessment to determine whether or not the persons can be released on an order of supervision, although we have had instances where persons, even though we put them on an order of supervision, simply disappear and we cannot find them. So that's why we weigh whether we detain them at the detention center, where yes, there's a cost to the state, and we have done some calculation where it perhaps costs us about $300 a day to keep them in detention. And we have to weigh the cost of detaining them and the threat that they pose to society as against anything else. So that's where we have to do that risk assessment as immigration officers in determining whether they should go in the detention center. Obviously, if they have been convicted for a criminal offense, they have to remain in detention until repatriation. There are some persons who may have entered the country illegally, and we cannot identify those individuals. And then there are some persons who may have come in legally, but have been found to be involved in some illicit activity, right? So it's just an assessment. Apart from that, you look at whether they have some place of abode where, as I said before, somebody can be vouching for them and would be willing to support them while we take the due process under the law.
Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Sorry, going back many years ago, CARICOM would have undertaken two particular initiatives to help with our drug trade. One of them was the OPV, which Trinidad would have paid for, and managed. However, it would have been to traverse the waters of I think in particular the Southern Caribbean. And this was to counter the drug trade. Now, we all know what has happened with regard to that contract being cancelled. And subsequently, and this is perhaps within a year or so, we have then purchased a long-range vessel, and you can correct me if I'm not using the right terms. My question is, what has been the effect of the cancellation of the OPVs in terms of the drug trade, and that particular gap in terms of the statistics related to the cancellation of it, and then now with the long-range vessel, what is the scope of it in terms of the extent of traversing of the waters? Do they do only the Trinidad and Tobago waters, or is that extended to the rest of the region? That was one initiative which I'm questioning. The other one would have been the radar systems, which would have been put into some of the islands in the Southern Caribbean as well. And I think that was a successful intervention at that time. My question is to you. Could you give me the facts as to the success of it, and what's the up-to-date position with it, and where are we going next with regard to these radars?
Madam Chair, through you, with respect to the OPV's project and the most recent long-range vessels, we do not have the statistics available to us by way of what is the actual capability of those vessels. But given the fact that the agencies that were intended to have the responsibilities for the operationalization of those initiatives falls within the remit of the Ministry of National Security, we may attempt to provide that answer in writing. I'm afraid the same will have to apply. We will we will investigate to what extent we can or may provide some statistics as far as the capabilities of that integrated radar system. Say again, ma'am?
Capabilities, but and the success of it, and if it has been successful, where do we go next with it?
Well, with respect to statistics as it pertains to the success of it, to some extent, some of these security arrangements at the operational level, i.e. an interconnected radar system, provides a measure of surveillance as a means to an end. But in the end, as far as what types of interdictions that were made as far as drug transshipment and so on, it may be difficult to locate exactly in statistical form what has been the impact of a particular surveillance mechanism.
But surely it has to get measured. Surely it must be measured. If you are to determine its success, it must be measured in some way or another. And perhaps you can give me that information in writing.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Given, and this is more a question of opinion, your opinion, given that the United States, the largest navy with submarines, etc., and radar systems, they have been unable to stop the hemorrhage, the flow of drugs into that country. Is it a myth that we have in Trinidad and Tobago that there are mechanisms that exist somewhere that would stop the flow of arms and ammunition and drugs to Trinidad and Tobago? And I say this in the context of the fact that we have to face reality. What we are facing, what we are capable of dealing with, and what resources do we need, instead of having some idea that perhaps it could be solved.
Madam Chair, through you, it's certainly not my remit to be able to confirm whether the U.S. border management system is or is not able to treat with the inflow of illegal substances or persons into their jurisdiction. But as it pertains to the Ministry of National Security with the mandate for the security of our state, and so the interests of our state, particularly our enduring interests, of course, a fundamental aspect of any state's responsibility to its citizens is to provide security, so that any attempt that is made by the state through its own development of its operational and legislative frameworks, as well as the extent to which we cooperate and collaborate with our international partners, becomes the fundamental responsibility of any state to its citizens. So that certainly the effort to ensure that we provide some measure of security to our citizens will always be the mandate of every state.
Agreed. Some measure and mandate to ensure security, but at some stage we have to have data. Do we know, or have we attempted to find out, how much drugs passes through Trinidad and Tobago? How much has been blocked, given expenditures on vessels, various expenditures on vessels? What is required to reach a stage or to give the assurance to citizens of the country that this drug problem, we would have a measurable impact on that problem? Because all I'm hearing, and this transcends many years, is we are doing, we will solve. There are. but nobody is saying that for, 40 tons of drugs come to Trinidad. We intend within 4 years to reduce that by 60% and thereafter 10% annually. I think the society is waiting for that kind of hardcore data. And the question is, are we thinking about supplying this hard data? And if so, when?
Madam Chair, through you, the question of being able to provide a statistical framework around the impact or the effectiveness of our various security initiatives is in and of itself a process of building capacity to do so. And so, to some extent, some of the initiatives that you would have spoken to are indeed means to an end, so that we made reference early on to the interconnected radar system. Those are systems that are designed to provide some measure of surveillance to which we can begin to generate those types of statistics that you are referring to, which is intended to eventually complete the circle by informing amendments to policies and strategies. So we are part of a continuum that is supposed to develop as we make interventions and investments into key aspects of our national security architecture.
The question to Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch, how, from where you sit in the Ministry of National Security, how has the Ministry of National Security adjusted its policies, its national security policies, to advance regional integration? Is it successful? Where are we at this point in time?
Madam Chair, as lead government in the quasi-cabinet for security, CARICOM quasi-cabinet, we would have led us by way of a number of initiatives to assist from the security aspect of the regional integration effort. By extension, it would mean that our different initiatives that would have been implemented in Trinidad and Tobago would have redounded to the benefit of the process of regional security. For example, we were the first country in CARICOM to establish a cybersecurity strategy. That would have been provided to the CARICOM security review system that would have ensured that other member states, for instance, were able to see what we are building by way of a legislative as well as an operational framework around matters of both terrorism, cybersecurity, and a couple of other initiatives. So that what has happened is there's a superimposition to some extent on some of the national initiatives towards the regional system of integration on matters of security. So there has been benefit because as the other member states of the region build the capacity based on some of our national initiatives being shared with them, there is a commonality of capacity development that is taking place across the region. And that redounds significantly in a number of ways. Again, I'm referring to what the team from Trade would have said before. There has to be a certain measure of security in the region that facilitates trade and economic development, cultural exchange, and a number of other initiatives. So that while we make the point that security is the fourth pillar in CARICOM, to some extent, it is a fundamental framework upon which other pillars are allowed to flourish. Because the reality is, if you do not have a certain measure of security, then the stability that fosters economic and trade development and so on may not be as achievable as desired.
The Caribbean Court of Justice. I read somewhere in the research that only 4 countries in the Caribbean are with the Caribbean Court of Justice, sees the Caribbean Court of Justice as their final appellate court. What could be done to assist in regional integration to bring the other Caribbean countries on board? Foreign Affairs? No, we did Foreign Affairs already. No?
Madam Chair, I don't think we are in a position to answer that question.
Okay. But I was thinking that at some point in time, it has to be addressed. That whole issue about the CCJ and how we view the CCJ. But we leave that for the time being. Any further questions? Any further? No, you want any questions on national security? Sure.
Yes, on page 4. On page 4, indicated that one of the impediments to a deepening and facilitating regional integration is bilateral tensions due to immigration issues. Do you care to elaborate on what are these tensions, which countries? We hear that citizens of Guyana are not treated with respect as, say, citizens of the Bahamas. Is this true? And you could elaborate, please. Thanks.
Through you, Chair. I think in terms of the bilateral tensions that was referred to in this document had to do with the issue of the Jamaican nationals and the furor that created when the Immigration Division would have refused entry to a number of persons. Suffice it to say, though, that the Immigration Division does not discriminate with any nationality in terms of them seeking entry into Trinidad and Tobago. The legislation outlines certain criteria for entry. And even in the decisions of the CCJ, Madam Chair, in one matter, the CCJ also highlighted the fact that there are certain conditions under which states have a right to refuse entry to individuals. For us, if someone is not meeting the criteria for entry, and this is anybody, they can be refused entry, and they will be refused entry. And there is redress under the law where they can appeal the decision of the officer who is refusing them entry, and then that has a process to go through. I don't know that we have been treating, or I would dare say that we have not been treating anybody unfairly or favoring any national over the other. You seek entry into a country, and there are guidelines set out in law for the Immigration Division to follow. And that is what we do.
Thank you very much. The information available to me, is it correct that Haitians who are members of CARICOM are treated differently than, say, citizens from Barbados or St. Vincent in any respect, or are they treated absolutely equally?
I think the only issue with Haitian nationals, and that is on a regional level, Haitian nationals require visas for entry. And while other CARICOM countries do not require visas for entry. And I think that decision is beyond me, and that is really a decision of the heads.
I have my final question to national security. And the question is as simple, might be complicated. I'm the Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South, and it includes the area of Woodbrook, St. James. And I've noticed over the last year or so, and probably more than that, an influx of Venezuelans in every nook and cranny, in every restaurant, and other places. I've also been reliably informed that they are very much prominent in the Chaguanas area also. My question to you, Mrs. Gandhi Andrews, but of course through your PS, when these persons come into the country, what sort of time frame is given to the nationals of Venezuela?
Venezuelan nationals, via an agreement with Venezuela, can be allowed to stay in the country for up to 90 days without a visa.
90 days?
Yes.
Without a visa?
Without a visa. And once they satisfy the criteria for entry, then they would be granted 90 days.
Mrs. Gandhi Andrews, after 90 days, what happened?
After 90 days, that individual is supposed to leave or seek an extension of stay. If they remain illegally in the country and they are then picked up by immigration, or even police may pick them up in an exercise and hand them over to the immigration division, then that whole process of identifying them and putting them through the special inquiry process kicks in. So that is typically what happens. We do not have the resources to go out and determine, okay, all of these individuals have overstayed their country and to overstay their time in the country and try to find them. No country has the resources to do that. We do from time to time engage in joint exercises with police and other agencies and conduct an exercise on the same Arapita Avenue. We did it sometime last year, and where 20-something nationals were picked up and they have been processed. So it's an ongoing thing. And we cannot say because there's a presence of the persons all over that they are breaking the law. If we find them working without a work permit, yes, they can be prosecuted under the Immigration Act, and some have been. But there's a process. And while we are seeing large numbers, historically, large numbers of Venezuelans have come into Trinidad and Tobago, and the statistics would show that there is actually a decrease in the numbers arriving at an official port of entry. What we are seeing now is that there are pockets of them throughout the country. So before, where they might have stayed in one area, you are now seeing persons of Venezuelan nationality going to different countries, inclusive of Tobago. When immigration does get a report, we would investigate and try to locate these individuals and determine their immigration status. And once they are legally in the country and they are not in breach of any of the laws, then there's really nothing that you can do.
Okay, Mrs. Gandhi, it begs the second question. There must be some mechanism whereby these persons come into your country for a period of 90 days initially. So you must have a listing. There must be some data. You must have some sort of data on these persons. These 100 persons have entered Trinidad and Tobago. So you check at the end of 90 days to see whether they have all left the country, or if some are still here, and whether they are being processed, as you said, whether they have asked for an extension for further 90 days or whatever. What happens? What is the mechanism that you as immigration, national security, can determine whether persons are here illegal? What do you do?
And it comes down to the question of resources. Because at the end of the day, Chair, and if I could just give you some statistics, in 2016, we had 39,209 Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago who would have arrived.
How many?
Legally.
39,000?
39,000. And those are persons who were allowed
in 2016?
In 2016 and in 2017. And these are all visitors and allowed entry legally. So these are not persons who have been refused. Out of that number, persons seeking entry, just about 725 were rejected, which represents about 1% of the individuals seeking entry. In 2017, there was a reduction, and there arrived 27,611 Venezuelan nationals.
Okay, how many of those persons would have returned home?
Of that number,
of the 39,200.
The 39,200, 38,339 would have departed in that year. Now, bearing in mind how these statistics would be, somebody would come in, let's say in December, and they would have a 3-month stay, which would then take them to February of the next year. All right, so the figures here in terms of numbers of persons who would have left is the figure that would have departed in 2017, right, or 2016. This figure is the 39,000 would have referred to those persons. So what we are seeing, and if I go through even statistics over a 5-year period, the average persons, number of persons who would have overstayed in the country represents somewhere about 3% of the numbers that would have arrived legally. Right? And that's what the figures over a 5-year period would have showed us, that just about 3%. Now, granted, there are persons who may be smuggled into Trinidad and Tobago, and there is no way for the Immigration Division to know how many persons have been smuggled into the country, given our geographic location. So I can only surmise that there may be persons coming in illegally, being smuggled into Trinidad and Tobago, and once we are alerted or once we pick up any of those individuals, then the due process will take place.
So I'm hearing that Haiti is a fellow CARICOM country. A Haitian citizen requires a visa, but a Venezuelan citizen who belongs to a country that is not part of CARICOM can come and visit us unimpeded for 90 days. And I know this is beyond you, but I think collectively as citizens we have to tell Haiti we are sorry.
Mrs. Andrews, you know, why I raised, because I think as a committee we are concerned, and especially I am concerned because of what I see on the ground outside there. You know, they're in everything. They're, you know, all the eating places, you know, the nursing homes, you know, small establishments, hotels, wherever, family lives, etc. They're entering. And I think that something, you know, some mechanism should be put in place to monitor. You know, yes, I agree with free movement of people, etc. But I think that we have to monitor the situation because it could become very tedious on us at some point in time, financially. Any further questions? So we move now to the Ministry of Agriculture. Ministry of Agriculture, Miss Angela Sue, could you please opening remarks and introduce your team, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to you and the other members and my other colleagues here this afternoon. I just wanted to say that, you know, we are pleased to appear before you to assist you in any way we can to facilitate this inquiry into the regional integration and strengthening of the CARICOM institution. With regard to the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, we, for the most part, collaborate among the states, member states, to facilitate trade in animal and animal products, plant and plant products, fisheries. I have here with me this afternoon to assist and support Dr. David Kangaloo, who is our Chief Veterinary Officer. We have Ms. Elizabeth Mohammed, who is our Director of Fisheries, and we have Ms. Deanna Ramroop, who is our Deputy Director of Research.
Yes, ma'am. Over to Minister.
Thank you, PS, for your introduction. In the context of the region, I examined the statistics of trade with regard to agricultural produce, and of course couldn't help but notice the negative balance of trade. Now, that negative balance of trade might be directly linked to overall agricultural production, and I'd like you to correct me, to speak to that. But even if that is so, in particular, with regard to the objective of reducing the food import bill and, of course, increasing our exports and diversification being a main agenda item for us in the, at this time with our economic challenges and going forward. Within the context of a strategic plan, what are your plans for reversing this imbalance of trade within the region? And I would imagine that there are some plans. Are there particular crops or produce which the region may require that there might be that you might be pursuing the growth of these particular produce, the production of these items? Are there any particular crops that you might be pursuing with regard to reversing this imbalance of trade? And what are the strategic initiatives there might be to reverse this imbalance of trade?
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, there is a negative balance of trade. Production over the last 5 to 6 years has been more or less consistent. There has been no real increase in agricultural production. But suffice to say, Trinidad and Tobago, despite that, we have seen some surpluses in some areas. As a matter of fact, I believe it's in about 8 countries. We have seen some surpluses. With regard to what are we doing strategically, we as the ministry have consistently over time been training our farmers in marketing, right? Marketing and agribusiness. Marketing and export for the local, marketing for the local and also for foreign countries within the CARICOM. That we have been partnering with NAMDEFCO with regard to that training as well. NAMDEFCO, through their field officers, have been training people in integrated pest management, post-harvest handling, general agriculture, in addition to what we have been doing. Our marketing generally has been with regard to fresh fruits and vegetables on the local and foreign market. So we are looking at boosting marketing and trade in various areas. And through NAMDEFCO, there has been the Buyers and Sellers Forum, where people meet and they express what they have to sell or what they want to purchase. Additionally, there is available on their website the sale and purchase, what is available for sale and purchase. All right. Also, they also assist exporters in identifying farmers who have a consistent supply of produce that member states can, engage and so on. They also facilitate the packing for export in terms of containers for sea freight and pallets for air freight. And Also, with regard to there is a sort of identifying, kind of certifying what some farmers do with regard to agricultural practices, right? In terms of how much pesticides they use, are they using the right agricultural practices to produce different commodities. This program assists in helping exporters and so identify farmers who have been using good agricultural practices. And of course, by doing so, they would have a good produce to present to the member state markets. There has been some, prohibitive aspects, one of which is the cost of production and also the cost of packaging, because we have a large amount of processed commodities that we give to the market. And the cost of packaging material, I'm told, is one of the factors that has really prohibited exports to the member states, because it increases the cost of the product to the member state.
In particular then, and I know that there are incentives that are also associated with packaging, but that apart, just if I could drill down, are there any particular products which we produce that are in demand by the region? Or are there any products that you have earmarked for production for sale, to sell within the region? And by example, we are producers of chicken. We are huge producers of chicken. Do we sell chicken to any parts of the region? Is it in demand? Is it that there are barriers to entry in any of those particular markets? What's hindering the export of chicken? Are we producing enough? But to go back to the original question, are there any particular items? If I was to say to you, name 3 products that we produce and that are in demand by the region. What are those, or are there products earmarked for production for the region?
Okay, a couple of products we have that we export to countries like Barbados, Jamaica. It's pineapple, pumpkin, watermelon, pawpaw or fruits. To Guyana, it would be corn, ginger, and bacon. Jamaica would be pineapples, frozen fish fillet, and chicken parts.
So if it is that there are these products that are in demand, in order to address the imbalance of trade, is it that you are now focusing on expanding our levels of, or increasing our levels of production so that we can address the imbalance and earn some foreign exchange? What is the strategy?
Well, as I said, we have 2 issues here. The demand by the member state for the commodity, right, and also the price. Now, the farmers in particular, they are the ones who would indicate to us what product they want to export. right, through NAMDEFCO. And it may not, that may not be, it may not be sufficient to increase the production of the produce and so on. But we can only point to the farmer that a particular country or a particular member state, this is what they trade in. And and we only get that information if the member states say to us, look, we want to import from you all a certain product. So it's basically on the demand from the member states that determines what we're going to produce.
I know, yes, and I know it's dependent on the demand. It's dependent on the farmer, as you said. But I also think that the ministry has a role to play in terms of a strategy for reducing the food import bill and for balancing the trade activity within the region. So I think the ministry has a fundamental role to play. And in that regard, I'm asking, there were several cross-border initiatives, but one comes to mind immediately, one with Guyana with regard to agriculture. Has that worked? And could you give us some of the success stories if it has been a success? Let me know. Could you advise? Could you let us know of the success?
Okay. The cross-border initiative with Guyana is one where 1,000 acres of land, 1,000 acres of land was leased, and 200 out of that 1,000 was used to grow citrus. The actual details in terms of the value that was produced out of this, we don't have, but we could bring it to you all in writing.
Okay, but the project is still alive?
The project is still alive. Yeah.
And the ministry is driving the project?
No, the ministry is not driving the project. The project is driven by the Citrus Growers Association.
May I ask a question, please? Besides the problem with packaging, etc., at page 5 of your document, you gave us your main reasons for the low export of agricultural products to CARICOM. You have not only production and marketing issues, but insecurity of land tenure, inadequate labor supply, predial larceny, high cost of production, lack of implementation of good agricultural practices, and limited use of grades and standards. How is the ministry addressing these issues in order to deal with increasing our production levels to CARICOM?
Okay, with regard to the limited use of grades and standards, as I told you, we have a division within the ministry that does training with regard to that. In addition, NAMDEFCO also does training with regard to good agricultural practices. Right?
How successful, Madam PS, is this training, and how does it translate to increasing production levels?
It is mixed in that culturally, farmers have their own way of tending to their crops, and they may or may not adhere to the training that we have given.
But and what is the ministry's role in such a situation? To me, it is not mandatory, but it's up to the farmer to whether he wants to do it, yes or no. So what is the ministry's role as the ministers in driving the process?
Well, actually, we are we're about to put together with NAMDEVCO, come up with some standards with regard to that. Right? Right now it's voluntary, but we have the view that if we would institute standards with regard to how you do your farming, how much pesticide you use and so on, and that is formalized, we are certain to get a good product for export.
Okay. How does the insecurity of land tenure, inadequate labor supply, predial larceny, those three, what is the ministry doing to address these issues there? You see, it all has to do with earning foreign exchange. I think that's the end of it. Yeah. Earning foreign exchange and cutting down your food import bill. Reducing your food import bill. So if these are your hindrances, how is the ministry dealing with land tenure security, insecurity, inadequate labor supply, predial larceny? Okay. What's happening there?
With regard to the insecurity of land tenure, as you may know, that land management division has gone from ministry to ministry to ministry, and has come back to the Ministry of Agriculture. What we are doing now is that we have introduced an electronic document management system. With that system, we would be able to, we would have on record all the approved land leases that we have, those that are not approved. We'd be able to pinpoint who owns what the lease was given for, because with the lease you have a program of development. So you come to us and you say, I want to do this on the land, and we are going to produce, we hope to produce X amount of produce, right? So with that now, we would be able to pinpoint and to be assured of how many approved parcels of land that we have for farmers, because farmers would only get state land if they are registered farmers. So, now, with regard to predial larceny, we have a predial larceny squad. We have been able to place them at various parts of the country, and they have increased patrols over the last year with regard to that. So they would patrol different areas where farmers are located to ensure that no predial larceny occurs. We have about close to 90 officers to patrol these areas.
And what about the issue of inadequate supply?
Well, the inadequate supply has the dimension where we cannot get people who want to farm, right? And that is the whole issue. We cannot get people who are interested in farming and doing that as an occupation, right? Farmers come to us and say they cannot get workers with regard to farming.
Okay. On this issue of the low exports, you know, you're talking about boosting the marketing capabilities, etc. But from the responses given by the ministry, the problem seems largely a production problem. And not going further, you said farmers come to the ministry and tell you what they wish to export, But the way that markets work, it's not what they wish to export, but what people wish to buy. So are we producing what our markets want? And if we're not producing, is there a strategic plan by the ministry to work together with our producers, our farmers, to get us producing goods for export? And then I think that would solve our problem.
Okay, well, that basically is done through NAMDEFCO. They are responsible for marketing and getting people, giving people information as to what is available, who wants to buy, who wants to sell. And that is their role in this whole thing.
So overall, there is no ministry initiative to get us producing goods for export.
Well, we basically do that through training our farmers in good agricultural practices for different produce, right? We have our extension officers who will go out to the different farms and give them technical assistance, advice, and so on for the production. But how much they produce it's really dependent on the farmer.
I understand that, but I think at some point it's not even how much they produce, but what they are producing. Are they producing things that people wish to buy? And if they're not, are we arming our producers with information about markets and going out there and being exporters and sellers of products, as opposed to just producing something you want to produce? You know, are we producing things for export?
Okay, we have been producing some market access documents, which I would ask Mr. Ramu to give you the details of what it is.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, through you. Basically, what is a market access document? So a market access document provides detailed conditions to facilitate trade in whatever the commodity is. So you would develop a document which will outline the basic information of that commodity. So for example, if it is hot peppers, you would have the agronomy, how it is grown, and the pests and diseases that may affect that particular commodity. Now, when we trade, and we trade in agricultural produce, you would have a country will have to set its phytosanitary conditions or its import conditions. So this market access document provides the information to guide the process in developing or for a country to determine their phytosanitary conditions. So the access guide is important, because with trade, you would create new opportunities and welfare for the countries. The phytosanitary conditions and issues can be determined and therefore to be easy to facilitate trade, and the phytosanitary import requirements could be established in a transparent manner. So to give an example, if, for example, Trinidad and Tobago is interested in exporting hot peppers, we will develop a market access document which can then be submitted to a prospective importer. And this, therefore, would set a tone for developing the phytosanitary conditions for importation and create ease of access for trade. So this is one of the ways in which we can support our markets in terms of looking and facilitating trade and accessing markets in these commodities. Thank you.
Okay. One more.
Okay. In your response, as you went through it, and again, I just would like to go back. You see this idea of if Trinidad and Tobago is interested in producing hot peppers. My analysis of this would be, okay, are we looking at what our intended export markets, what they are looking for, the goods that they are looking for, and then are we saying, can Trinidad and Tobago produce these goods to meet this demand? So we should not be addressing this from, all right, we want to produce this, so we will produce this and hope somebody buys it. We should be looking at what people would like to buy, and then can we produce it, and then produce it in a way that it we would reduce that we would increase our exports. And so that's the question I'm coming at. Like, is this the strategic planning? Is this the direction we're going in?
Okay. Mr. Herbert, you want to respond?
I don't know if I can help with this discussion, but in CARICOM, countries import from the rest of the world and countries sell to the rest of the world. There's a system which records imports from the rest of the world. It has to do with suspensions of CT and safeguard certificates. And maybe that might be a source of information on products which we buy from the rest of the world if we are looking at reducing the food budget.
Okay. Follow-up question, Madam Chair. In that model, do we look and say, for example, our food import bill is $4 billion annually, and within 3 years, 20% of that should be produced by farmers? And if we come to that conclusion, then what products do we make or produce or encourage our farmers to produce just as a form of import substitution strategy? Because some of the things we would not, the economies of scale would not allow us and whatnot. But it seems to me that we are in an activity mode. We are doing this, we are doing that, and we are doing the other. But at what is the net effect of this? And I'm looking, because I've been hearing this argument since I was in A-level in 1960s, we need to become self-sufficient in food. And I suspect next 60 years will be the same. Is there a target, a time frame by which we are working towards so that we can reduce our significant food import bill, or we'll be constantly repeating this issue over and over?
I think it's a work in progress. As a personal view, it's a work in progress. We have to do it incrementally, right? And when I say incrementally, in all aspects, working on our farmers, right, to get to that level where they actually want to export, right? There are particular farmers, a certain group of farmers who want to do it, and then there are others who just want to do it just, to feed the local community, right? And how do we get those people to do more? Right? That is the issue. How do we get those people to do more? Right? We can only make suggestions, right? We can put mechanisms in place, right, for them to do so. Show them marketing strategies, show them what other countries, what they import in terms of what they import from other countries outside of the CARICOM. We can point that to them, but if it's whether they are willing to do it. We can only provide training, we can provide advice, we can provide technical assistance. But it's if the farmer is willing to do it.
My question is to Dr. David Kangolo. I'll tell you what, what you see in me is what you get. I am not too hardened with what I'm hearing from agriculture. I'm not very heartened at all. So I want to ask Dr. Kangolo a question as to what is your vision you see for the Ministry of Agriculture playing a role? What is your responsibility with respect to regional integration and the strengthening of CARICOM? We see here in your report you have given, I read it twice, and the problem here is production levels are low. The balance of trade, well, it's negative over the last 5-6 years. From where you sit in the ministry, I want to get a different perspective. I'm hearing Madam P.S., I'm hearing you. But I want to get a different perspective. You know, they say in football, a fresh pair of legs, new perspective. I know nothing about football, I just listen. All right? So I want to get a different perspective from you, Dr. Kangaloo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My expertise is in the area of animal health. I would like to say first and foremost. However, I'll attempt to answer your question as best as I can. Regional integration, as we all know, has been in the works for and in the news for many, many, many years, even before I was born. And many models and attempts to have all the 15 members of the CARICOM community. Many attempts have been, some successful, unsuccessful. If we have to go forward as a region, we will need all 15 member states to be on the same page with respect to many issues, especially intra-regional trade. Okay. They said that cricket is the only thing that really come by, really the whole region is united with cricket. But I think we need to have more activities than cricket to unite the region. Say charity begins at home, and the region could be very strong once united. However, easier said than done. Attempts have been made before. You could go way back to the Federation that was attempted in the 1960s, and that didn't work. The issue of trade, as P.S. Norris Hubert mentioned earlier, the issue of trade is of paramount importance to the region. However, we face fierce competition from other countries with this free trade, all right? We need to really put our heads together by whatever means, whichever mechanisms we may use in the CARICOM. Put our heads together, whether it's at the level of the conference of the heads or at the COTED, to put our heads together to try to agree on certain issues and the way forward. Having said that, and having attended a few COTED meetings, it's easier said than done. Countries in the CARICOM have different needs. At any point in time, they have different views, they have different trade aspirations, and then, you know, the politics always play a major role in each country. Each country is a sovereign state, and there must be harmonized approaches to situations and addressing issues. Once there's a harmonized approach to say, trade in plant products or trade in animal products, I think that will be a step in the right direction. And we are working towards that. The CARICOM chief veterinary officers, the committee, is working hard and spending a lot of time addressing issues related to trade within the region. Currently, there's a CARICOM inspection and trade protocol, which will go to the Legislative Affairs Committee at CARICOM next week. And that is a protocol which has been in the pipeline for over 6 or 7 years, but finally we have a document. And that's a protocol that can be utilized by any one of the CARICOM countries to deal with the importation of products, animal products, outside of the region that's coming into the region, any third country, or intra-regionally within the region. So we are making headway, we are contributing in a small way, and hopefully we will have good results in the future when it comes to intra-regional trade, because many of the CARICOM countries import from the USA, from Canada, from the UK, and we don't import from each other. We do not import animal and animal products from each other in the quantities that we import from other countries, from third countries outside of the region.
Do we have the supply? Do we have it? That we could do that?
Well, recently, I could tell you, we have in my personal opinion, Trinidad and Tobago, we do not produce the amount of beef, mutton, or pork to export. We consume everything that we produce. Chicken, we consume all of the chicken that we produce, all of the poultry that we produce. However, recently, the Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency, which is CAFSA, it's a CARICOM organ, one of the organs of CARICOM. They conducted risk assessments in 6 countries in CARICOM: Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Belize, Suriname, and Guyana a couple of years ago, and that exercise was conducted to determine the eligibility of these 6 major producing poultry countries in the CARICOM to export to the region. Okay, and there were 11 processing plants in those 6 countries that were approved to export to one another within the region. That was adopted by the COTED in October last year. Okay, we haven't seen any country import poultry from any of those 6 countries following the conclusion of the risk assessment and COTED adopting it. But we expect that also to commence in the not too distant future. So we are making headway. Recently, the CARICOM chief veterinary officers, we worked on some protocols with the movement of sheep and goats throughout the region. And the chief veterinary officers have signed off on it, and COTED has signed off on that. So that's another protocol that we agreed on. There's also the protocol with boar semen, okay, for artificial insemination. We signed off on that protocol for the movement of boar semen throughout the region, and you know, the CARICOM chief veterinary officers, we meet annually, and we also have meetings by electronic meetings, and we discuss issues pertaining to trade in agricultural products, animal and animal products specifically, because we realize we have to, as we all say, charity begins at home, and it should begin in the region. So we have been moving towards that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kangaloo. Ms. Luandra Neptune? Is Ms. Neptune here?
Ms. Ramroop and Ms. Mohammed.
No, I'm talking about agriculture.
Ms. Ramroop and Ms. Mohammed.
This is it? Okay, is Ms. Ramroop here? Ms. Ramroop, give me your perspective now as Deputy Director of Research. Give me your perspective on where you think, how you think this ministry can play a role, a greater role in the integration movement. What could we do to up production levels and whatnot? Trade, yes, to trade with each other. Yeah.
Okay.
How are we going to do that?
In terms of with plant health and plant trade in plant and plant health products, within the region, we also have a grouping that's referred to as the Caribbean Plant Health Directors. And within this grouping, you would have the directors from the various countries who would come together to discuss matters, priority matters with regards to plant and plant health products. And apart from, like for example, priority pests and diseases within the region, they would also discuss other issues, for example, trade issues. So that is a mechanism that exists within the region.
Yeah, we're going to cut here.
Yeah, so that is a mechanism that exists between the region, and there's dialogue within the region in terms of the plant health directors, in terms of moving forward. One of the key things with trade, from a crop protection point of view and accessing markets, will be to meeting the regions, the countries, the individual countries, their phytosanitary conditions. Because these countries are all signatories to the WTO SPS agreement, and they would all set import conditions for commodities. So within the region, one of the ways in terms of moving forward, so you have targeted commodities. So Trinidad and Tobago would have, let's say, targeted commodities for export. And I would have used the example for hot peppers. We would have heard before pineapples or so. Within this grouping, we would discuss, like I said, or produce market access document, which is like your passport for trade, for market access to the countries. So that's one aspect. And if you couple that with the production aspects, like the training, for example, with one of the divisions in our ministry, with production aspect in training farmers with good agricultural practices in these targeted commodities, and you marry that with your market access document, that's one way in which you can, a mechanism in which you can actually try to boost your exports for these commodities. Thank you.
Well, this brings us to the end of our session. We had intentions of finishing at 5 o'clock. We have gone over by 13 minutes. But I thought it was a very good session. I have a little question mark with respect to agriculture. I'd really like to bring you back. But today I thought that we did quite well, and the committee is much better off in terms of understanding the position of each of the entities there. I invite now closing remarks in this order from Mrs. Angela Su, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Ms. Vashti Jitman, I'm not going in that second name, I'm not going there, Ms. Vashti Jitman, followed by Mr. Norris Hubert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ministry of Agriculture, I wish to thank you all for having us. We recognize that you may not have been satisfied with regard to what is happening in agriculture with regard to trade and so on. But I want to assure you that we have been making every effort to get farmers to think outside of the box through our training, our officers, like our chief vet, Ms. Ramroop, going out there into CARICOM, discussing different issues as it relates to trade in the particular products, animal products, plant and plant products, and coming back with information recommendation which we will impart to our farmers. That notwithstanding, we are committed to regional integration, and we continue even as we do our work here in Trinidad and Tobago through our different mechanisms out there, through the CVO's meeting, as Dr. Kangley would have said, through plant directors meeting, through the regional planners on policy, right? All these different groups we take part in, and we utilize the information that we've gotten to assist us in the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman and members of the committee, I wish to thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. And I trust that given our discourse, the committee as well as the public has been provided with clarity concerning the Ministry of National Security's role and mandate as it pertains to security and the strengthening of the CARICOM institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to you and the members of the committee. In my discussions, I think I made one point which I want to reiterate, finding the balance between national interests and regional interests.
Yes.
And I think that I want to point the committee to 3 simple areas where focus can be placed on. There's something called contingent rights in the treaty, which allows someone who is moving to provide services to move with their spouse, their parents. If we can get that at a regional level, I think that will help in the movement, the services aspect of the CSME. Secondly, I want to point to the area of public procurement, which is now being rolled out as a protocol. And that provides the opportunity for countries to tender for activities in other countries, businesses in one country, so that it helps with the whole regional identity. And lastly, I want to point to a third area, which is the CCJ. If we can move as a regional body to incorporate the both jurisdictions as a region, then that will help in our identity as we go forward. So I think that those are 3 areas that the committee may want to look at as they do the work much further. So thank you, Chair, to you and your committee once more.
Thank you very much to you, Mr. Herbert, and other 2 permanent secretaries. And I want to thank the media. I want to thank the staff of the Parliament, and of course, to the viewing and listening audience. This meeting now stands adjourned.
Okay, thanks.